Political panel. Maura Gillespie is with us, the founder, principal, Blue Stack Strategies, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Aisha Mills, the founder, principal of Community Asset Management. It's great to see both of you. We're talking about something a little bit differently this evening, and I'd like to get to a few topics with you, but the president embracing AI. Aisha, I'll start with you here because there are some concerns by Democrats who were used to the idea of putting guardrails on an emerging and potentially dangerous technology under the Biden administration. And we're seeing largely the opposite now with an all-of-government approach at cutting red tape and hastening this advanced technology. Is this the right approach right now?
Well, it isn't. And, you know, in addition to this flagrant deregulation that completely has no guardrails at all, which is nonsensical, the thing that concerns me most is this third executive order that the president has is, quote unquote, called an anti-woke AI order. And what he's also attempting to do is to censor artificial intelligence and the technologies that are developed here in the United States. And that is just completely asinine and kills global competitiveness. You can't have an artificial intelligence technology that essentially is not allowed to analyze, sort, and be able to produce demographic data, to produce data on our climate and what's happening all across the world. You can't possibly neuter, essentially, and censor data and expect to have a competitive business, because you have to make business decisions, if it's market analysis, if it is risk assessment, which is really what climate data does, is it helps companies and governments be able to assess risk. So I think that there's a lot of what's not being said here, which is frankly counter to the free-wielding, free market ideology that he's propagating, that would essentially make the U.S. Development of AI, actually, it would kill our global competitiveness. And what it would do is it would stifle companies' ability to really be able to dig in there and create the technology that's going to have meaningful outcomes for people all around this globe. And that's going to hinder, frankly, our economy.
Well, Maura, I'd love to bring you into the conversation here, too, and get your opinion on this, because one of the headlines that just crossed the Bloomberg terminal when it comes to President Trump, actually speaking about this very issue, it says Trump says that there needs to be AI rules, but they have to be smart. What is the balance here when it comes to regulating AI moving forward?
So I think what Aisha's talking about is that what are the parameters, right? I mean, I think by and large, most people don't understand AI. We as humans it's something that we don't fully understand, but the basic tenet is that it is based on input from human beings. And so what Trump is trying to say is that he thinks those algorithms are biased. Okay, so then who is the arbiter of putting in that information to then generate the data? And so I think that is still a very large question on that tenet there. And he did not have an answer. Thus far, does not have an answer. And so that will need to be fleshed out before anyone can really weigh whether this is a good policy plan or not, because it's really pretty vague in those terms. So, I don't know that the constituents all across the country, when members of Congress go home in August this week for the House, will be asking, what are the parameters of AI intelligence data entry. But I do think that they are concerned because they don't understand it. And largely what we see is when people don't understand something, they immediately are afraid of it.
I want to ask you both about some of the other remarks the president was making about trade. That was the big story this morning before he turned to his remarks on AI. And we heard about it directly from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, speaking on Bloomberg TV and radio, and spoke to his working relationship with the president as they get through these deals. Listen.
When President Trump tells me what his goals are, I think about what is the best way for me to give good framing to market participants for them to understand what he's doing, because he always has a plan. It's not always obvious.
So, Aisha, we got a trade deal, or at least the framework of a deal with Japan. That was followed on with a series of headlines pointing us to what could be an imminent deal with the EU. We talked about this with Howard Lutnick today, as well as Peter Navarro, and they're feeling pretty good about things currently at the White House. The markets are as well, as we notch new highs ahead of this August 1st deadline. How do you rationalize that, if anything more than this test of the Trump tariff regime appears to be working?
Yeah, I think that that is such a fair question. I know people have been raising that a lot. If the tariffs are so awful, then why isn't the economy completely crashed, right? Now, I think that that's an interesting question. I also think we should honor and respect the intelligence of everybody who's watching and understand that some of these are going to be like lagging indicators, right? So the president having a good idea today that no one really can explain the economics around it or have like a real economic theory or projection and analysis around why it makes sense for 10 years, for 20 years. But it's an idea. And so now you've got his folks who are just going to go out and sell it, right? Sell the art of the deal without any real thought about the long-term impact. I think that that's the thing that should be giving us all pause. It's really difficult to make decisions and make projections when they run afoul of, counter to, or just don't even make economic sense, right? And the fact that they're admitting and acknowledging that they don't really want to have any communication around it or a deep game plan. It's just the president has a vision and I'm going to go out there and sell the vision. I think that that should give us all pause because while we may not see deep volatility in this moment while the conversations are happening, I think that there are major consequences that we should understand at least for a decade, 20 years out as these conversations are happening. That's the part of the analysis and the data that we're missing. And I think that, you know, we would all do ourselves a disservice by pretending that that doesn't matter because it does.
Well, more to build off of this, we had reporting on the Bloomberg terminal this morning that we could be getting close to a trade deal with the European Union. But we also had reporting that they're preparing retaliation if a deal doesn't get done. And we know that the EU is looking at targeting some of those politically sensitive goods in red states like soybeans in Louisiana, where House Speaker Mike Johnson is from. How politically potent could this issue be as lawmakers make their way back home in the August recess? How are Republicans going to be messaging around the potential economic consequences here?
Well, and that's something that I think that many of the members of the House GOP especially are focused on is how do they handle those town halls with the myriad of concerns, you know, folks have at home about prices and cost of living. And so when it comes to tariffs, I do think that during the 2024 election, it wasn't fully explained that the short-term pains, as the president was calling them, for these long-term gains would be directly impacting U.S. consumers. And so, you know, when you look at those issues you just mentioned, some of the things that the EU is looking to target, even with Japan, you know, with the tariffs on steel and aluminum, Japanese importing cars, you know, what's the cost benefit of just, you know, paying for those resources or paying for the fully finished car coming in from Japan, you know, based on those costs. I do think that there are going to be conversations to be had about, is this a plan that's working for everyday Americans? I don't know that it necessarily will, but I do think that there are a lot in the GOP who are willing to give the president a little bit of time for his plan to flesh out. And you're seeing that right now. They will have to answer their constituents, but they're going to be touting other things and trying to focus on the ways they are trying to spur the economy and spur manufacturing here in the United States.
So focus as well on clawing back funding more. And you know a bit about this, having worked for a former Republican speaker in John Boehner. It's been a while since we've seen a rescissions package passed, but that, of course, took place just days ago. And we talked about it with Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, who's ranking member on the House Budget Committee, and took a pretty hard line on this, as many Democrats are, about what he sees happening in the administration if they pass another rescissions package and what it will mean for Capitol Hill. Listen.
There is no question that another rescissions package from this White House is them essentially saying we want a full government shutdown. Russell Vought, by the way, last week, let's not forget what he said. He said the problem with the budget process is that it's too bipartisan. So he's outright saying that they want a government shutdown and they want to force one.
Right, that's the top Democrat on the Budget Committee. Maura, you heard what he said. Another rescissions package from this White House is saying we want a full government shutdown. Is that what's going to happen?
I would say that another rescissions package is just more of the separations of powers, those lines being muddied. I do think that Speaker Johnson needs to have just to keep the confidence of his chairman and his committees, knowing that they have this power, which the power of the purse does belong with Congress. It belongs there, and we have that for a reason. And so blurring those lines even further will make the job of Speaker harder, but also for those chairmen to know where they stand. Because again, they have to go home to their constituents and explain the cost of things, the cuts to things. And while they agreed on one thing and then the president comes in and says, no, actually, I don't agree with that, I'm going to take it away from you, that's going to be tough to report back to your constituents and explain why. I do think as the president's a lame duck president, does his approval in the next few years go down as a result, and how long do those members stick out their necks for him is to be seen. And I do think that I don't know necessarily that this is them wishing for a government shutdown, because politically we know that doesn't really help. But both sides tend to lose, but especially the party in power. So I don't think that it's going to look good on them to do so. So in this case, I would say, no, it's not a good strategy for the White House to be thinking that way. And quite frankly, we should want our members of Congress to be working together, to be working across the aisle, collaborating on issues like this, especially when you have such a close majority, a slim majority, as we've seen in the House and in the Senate, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Aisha, some Republicans have also argued that rescissions will save the government money. And I want to point out President Trump says that he sees tariffs ranging from 15 to 50%. Of course, tariff revenue has been part of this administration's push when it comes to potentially bringing down our national debt. But I want to get back to this conversation here about a potential government shutdown. When you hear Democrats talking that this could be a way to get more negotiating leverage, what would you advise them moving forward here as we look to a potential showdown, at least with the appropriations process in the fall?
Well, I just want to remind everybody who's watching that there is always a potential showdown with the continuing resolutions, and we get to this date of September 30th. There has not been an actual budget passed in America in decades, like when it was time to pass it. So the whole point is the showdown. It's the drama of the politics. I think what I would advise Democrats, especially as they're going home this summer to talk to their constituents, is to keep reminding the American public why. Why are we here? Why is the president pushing these quote unquote rescissions? Why are the Republicans trying to renege on money that was already budgeted and allocated to help and support the average American worker, regular American people? Why are they trying to claw that money back? They're stealing it back so that they can give it to the top 0.505% of billionaires and to give out tax breaks for people that aren't most of us. That's the number one thing the Democrats can keep reminding everybody.
Well, Democrats are reminding everybody about Jeffrey Epstein a lot lately as well, Aisha, and I do need to get to this because members of the House are leaving town starting tonight because of a blow up in the Rules Committee. Republicans the Speaker of the House decided to send everybody home instead of allowing Democrats to force a vote on releasing the Epstein files. Let's hear from the Speaker on his support as well of the House Oversight Committee's effort to subpoena convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. He offered this caveat as well. Listen.
If they see fit to bring in Ghislaine Maxwell for testimony, that's fine. I will note the obvious concern, the caveat that Chairman Comer and I and everyone has, that could she be counted on to tell the truth? Is she a credible witness? I mean, this is a person who's been sentenced to many, many years in prison for terrible, unspeakable conspiratorial acts and acts against innocent young people. I mean, can we trust what she's going to say? Even if she raises her hand and says that she'll testify under oath, is that something that can be trusted? That's a reasonable question. Is that credible evidence? I don't know.
So maybe an effort to discredit the witness here, Maura. I don't know if this would have ever happened in John Boehner's House of Representatives, but what are we in for here? Would testimony like this be public?
I can say that this nonsense would never have happened under Speaker Boehner's. He has a no-nonsense policy. But the fact that Speaker Johnson's calling into question this, I think that could work in both ways, right? I mean, one, she has nothing to lose, but, two, if she was looking for some sort of lessening of a sentence, which I don't think is possible, but could she be pardoned on Trump's way out for having maintained silence? And, the conspiracy theories that could come from that run the gamut, I would say. But I do think it's interesting that the decision to bring her in by House Oversight kind of happened without necessarily any involvement from the former president and from Speaker Johnson. I think that it was the pressure, and you saw it kind of play out with the House Rules Committee, the kind of issues they ran into there, and then this happened. And now DOJ is looking to bring her in as well. So it's interesting what that kind of spurred. But I do think that the more that it's a focus of Republicans, the more a problem it becomes for President Trump, as it already is, but it kind of carries that on, as opposed to the Democrats' focus on it, which actually kind of just weakens the entire controversy itself, because as it's been mentioned before, they've had 4 years. Chuck Schumer was in charge of the Senate. He could have really looked into this if he wanted to know about it. And so for him to speak up about it, for other Democrats to be so gung-ho about this, it really is kind of questionable. And if they get at a town hall and that's their focus, that's their message, they're missing huge opportunities to talk to their constituents about what really matters, kitchen table issues that they failed repeatedly to focus on in the last election. So they would be remiss if they did that again.
Well,